So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to learn how to gather input from a user and then to use that information in Python. And so we're going to be prompting the user to enter in some information. And from there, we're going to use that information, perform some math on it, and have our program actually do something. So, first thing you need to know is that there's very specific syntax that you need to utilize in order to prompt the user to actually enter in information. So, what you see here in black is information that you need to type in exactly. So, if you want the user to receive an input prompt, you need to put the words input with parentheses and double quotes. And then inside of it, you need to include some sort of prompt to tell them what they need to enter in. So make sure this is very clear, make sure it uses good punctuation, correct spelling, so they know exactly what information you're asking for. Now, what you're probably wondering is, wouldn't this input line by itself work and get information from a user? It will, but the problem is that we need to, after we get that information from a user, after they've input information, make sure that we save that information somewhere. Believe it or not, Python doesn't automatically save it. So this line of code right here, where we have a variable name on the left-hand side of an equal sign or an assignment statement, is basically going to help us save this inputted value. So on the right-hand side here, we're prompting the user to enter in information, and then what we're doing is once they enter in that information, we're immediately saving it inside of a variable name. So make sure you include both parts of this particular statement. Now, the other thing that you need is you need to save the user's response in the correct way. And what's difficult in Python is that it automatically saves the response the user enters as a string, which is okay if you want the user's response to be saved as text. But if you want to perform any math on it, strings don't work. We can't do math on strings of text. So, something to keep in mind is that Python always saves things as a string, and odds are we're going to have to make some changes in order to turn those into numbers when we need to perform some math on those numbers. Now, here's a couple of examples of what input statements might look like. So, here it says name equals, and we have input, enter your name. So what this is going to do is prompt the user to enter in their name. And once they enter in their name, it's going to save it inside of a variable called name. This one down here is asking the user to input in the length of a rectangle. And then it's going to save whatever value they enter into the variable called length. Now notice in each of these, I did a nice job using, you know, the colon there to give some space. I put a space in there. I used good punctuation, so it was very easy to read and very easy to enter in the information. Now, this line right here is a little weird. This is an example of if you want, for some reason, an input line to quit your program, you can actually put input, hit any number to quit, or hit any key to quit. And if you input anything on this particular statement, it will quit your program. So you can keep that in mind if you want to include that in the future. But remember, without a variable name, this doesn't do anything but potentially quit your program. It will not take in and save a value. So if you don't have it equal to a variable name, it is not going to save the value that they enter. Now, this bottom question here says, what do we do when we want numerical input? Like, for example, the length of a rectangle. Maybe we're going to find the perimeter or the area of a rectangle, whatever that might be. Well, when we want to find numerical input, we're going to have to do what's called casting. So, what casting does is casting converts one variable type into another, which is really helpful, for example, with our input statements, because input statements save what the user enters as a string, but we want to turn it into a number. So what we can do is we can use this process called casting to take a, for example, in this case, a string variable and turn it into an int or a float or something else. So I have a couple of examples of what this will actually look like in code. So here you'll notice we have pretty much the same code that we had on the previous slide. The only difference is the code that I put in red here. So you'll notice that I surrounded this input statement with float in red with parentheses. Here I surrounded it with int, and here I surrounded it with eval. So essentially what's happening is there are three functions here. There's the float function, where we put something on the inside. There is the int function, where we put something on the inside. And there is the eval function, where we put something on the inside. Now, when we utilize the float, int, and eval functions, and we put, a variable or a value on the inside, what it's going to do is whatever is inside of here, it's going to convert into a float, into an integer, or if you use eval, it's going to turn it into whatever data type the user has entered into the program. So I tend to use eval because it's going to evaluate it in one quick swoop. But if you want to specify float or int, that will work okay too. But you can see that we can surround our input statement because that input statement is going to return a string. And if we put a string inside of any of these functions, it can then turn whatever the user enters into a number. Something to note about this eval function is that if the user enters in information incorrectly, it might not catch it, whereas the int and float function will, because these are saying that you specifically are turning them into numbers. So you can utilize any of the three of these to cast your values that come from input. And we're going to use that in the example program that we're going to create today. So we're going to create a program that does the following. So essentially, we want to create a program that will convert pounds to kilograms. So the algorithm or the step-by-step process we're going to go through in order to solve this problem is we're going to first introduce the program to the user so the user knows what the program is supposed to do. Then from there, we're going to input information. So in this case, we're going to have them input their weight. Then we're going to calculate the weight in kilograms by taking the pounds and dividing it by 2.2. And then we're going to output the weight in kilograms to the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to go create this program in Replit. So we go here, go into your Replits. You're going to create a new program. So we can see Python there. And we're going to call this Unit 2 Lesson 4 Weight Calculation Program. So I'm going to create this Replit here. And then I'm going to start by adding some comments at the top. So this is going to be my first input output calculation program. So I'm going to add that as a comment so I know what the purpose of this was. And this is going to convert pounds to kilograms. So that's my goal of my particular program. Now, as I code, I'm going to make sure that I comment either before I type a line of code or off to the side. It doesn't matter which to me that you use, but you need to make sure you comment regularly and often. Make sure that it's detailed, make sure that it tells me what your program is going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to provide a program description. So I'm going to print a message to the screen telling the user what my program is all about. So here I'm going to type, this program converts your weight in pounds into kilograms. And then I'm going to put some slash ends in here. Make sure that I have a couple of spaces after that. So here I'm going to go run it, and I can see it's writing on the screen. It's running a little bit off, but hopefully it reads a little bit easier in the future. So let me see. If I run that one more time into kilograms, hopefully I can get that to fit a little nicer. Okay. So now I've printed my description to the screen. The second thing I need to do is I need to take in user pounds, so user input, their weight, and save it as a number. So I'm going to type out my input statement first. So I have input, I'm going to write enter your weight in pounds. Now here, notice I'm adding in some spacing, I'm adding in a colon, I'm making sure that I have, some good formatting in there so it's easy to read. Now I remember that I cannot put an input statement without actually including a variable to save that in. So I'm going to include a variable here called pounds. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm creating a variable called pounds, and pounds is going to be where I save, whatever the user enters in as their weight. Now, I know that I need the weight to be a number. And remember, input statements by default are strings. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add the eval function around this input statement here. Make sure you add the parentheses on both sides. So notice I use the eval function around the input statement, and this is going to ask the user to enter in their pounds. So it says enter your weight in pounds. So say you weighed 150 pounds. Now what our program does right now is it prompts you to enter in your weight, and then it saves it inside of pounds. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to convert pounds to kilograms and save in variable called kilograms. So I'm going to create a new variable called kilograms. And essentially, what that variable is going to do is it's going to take the pounds that I weigh and divide it by 2.2. So now what our program does is it prints a message to the screen. It then takes in user input and turns that number that they enter into an actual number we can do math on. And then we're going to convert our pounds to kilograms. So if we run it, we're not going to see all of this in action, but hopefully we know that it is taking place. Now, we don't have proof here that this is actually taking place. We're just hoping that it's, and we know from looking at the code that it's calculating this value. So the last thing that we need to do here is we need to actually print this message to the screen. So I'm going to print out a message to the screen here that says your weight in kilograms is, I need to put quotes on both sides of that. And then I want to print it out to the screen. Now, if I print this as is, this is what it's going to look like. So we enter in our pounds, and then it says your weight in kilograms is. What I want to do is, regardless of the weight that this person who uses my program weighs, I want it to print this kilograms variable to the screen. So what I can do here is I can utilize the comma in my print function. So I did the string first of your weight in kilograms is, and then I'm going to put kilograms, my variable name, over here. So my goal is that this would output weight in kilograms to the screen. So I run this program, enter in my weight, and look, it turns my weight from pounds into kilograms. Now, because we use the variable name here, what's cool is I can enter in any value and it will convert it. Variable names save the values that have been entered. So it doesn't matter what number I enter, it's always going to correctly convert my weight from pounds into kilograms. Now, we can also utilize, we talked about that input function that allows you to quit. So here you can do hit any key to quit. You put this at the end of your program. Essentially what this will do is it will just slow down your program and it will wait to close out. Sometimes if your program goes too quick, it can actually close out and you don't see everything that it does. So if you add in this line to the end of your program, you add it into the end, it will just print to the screen, and then whatever key you enter, doesn't matter, it will quit your program. So keep in mind, this will just simply pause and allow the user to decide when the program stops running. And this line of code must be used at the end of your program. Keep that in mind as you code. So here's our first program. It will convert pounds into kilograms, and it will work for whatever value the user enters